So without further ado, I shall hand over to Tony, who's going to tell us how to make Oxford a smart city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Setting me up for a major fall, I think. But thank you very much. And one of the things Brian's given me this just now is a Guardian article that's just come out making the case for low-tech dumb cities. So there you go. That's the counterpoint. So hi, my name's Tony Hart. Not the artist, but never mind. I did meet him once and got his autograph. And you have to be of a certain age if you remember more from some of those things. There are a few of us in the room. So my name is Tony Hart. I typically have had my background is that I've worked in the IT industry, mainly in business development and marketing for companies like Intel, Cisco. Actually originally started with digital equipment, so DEC back in the day, selling PDP-11s and VAXs for those of people who remember them. But I worked for them from 1980 onwards. I originally did my degree here in Oxford. I did engineering, science and economics at Christchurch, but that's an awful long time ago, back in the 70s. So my role is, as Brian said, I run the Smart City project. So I've got a great title, Head of Smart Oxford, and I work for both the City Council and the County Council, which, as any local people will know, is an interesting challenge, as they're totally diametrically opposed politically. But as you know, Dee Dee's in the room, so hello. She works for the County Council. We do work very closely together between the executive side, between the city and the county, in terms of trying to make things happen. Just to set expectations in terms of this presentation, really a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is what I would like the smart city in Oxford to be. It's not really where we're at today, but a lot of it's wishful thinking and hope, and really looking to get anybody who wants to get engaged in what we're doing within the smart city process. So as I say, I run Smart Oxford, which is a great title. I've got a good title, Head of Smart Oxford. In reality, I don't have a team, I don't have any budget, and what I have to do is I have to persuade the partners that are involved in Smart Oxford to do the things that should be done and need to be done, rather than the things they want to do automatically. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And also talk about who the partners in the Smart Oxford programme are. I've been doing the role for, as Brian said, for 18 months now. I have been involved kind of partially in the Smart City project in Oxford over the last 5 or 6 years, but it's been more of a talking shop in terms of rather than making actually things happen, because the role of Head of Smart Oxford, a person running the programme, has only happened with me being appointed to the role. So, my presentation. What is a smart city? Because almost the first question that anybody asks is, what is a smart? So I say I run the Smart City project in Oxford, and the first question everybody asks is, what is a smart city? And really, and there are a number of definitions, but what I'm really talking about here is an environment and infrastructure that uses digital technology. So it's more than anything, it's gathering data, it's using digital technology, data, to make things work better. And it could be across the widest range of technologies you can imagine. So that is not just an opportunity, but a huge challenge, because it's such a broad possibility. And very much a smart city uses ICT, information technology, to enhance livability, workability, and sustainability. So I'll come back to that more in the past. And you could have smart, almost smart anything, in terms of smart buildings, smart traffic, smart anything could be made smart, e.g. technology enabled. by the way, yeah, stop me if you've got a shout out if you've got any questions or any comments to make. Please do. Right. This is all right. So what I wanted to do is briefly. I've been starting to work very closely with the Connected Places catapult. It used to be the Future of Cities catapult, but they merged with one of the other catapults. And what I wanted to do was highlight the fact that, and these are slides, as you can see, taken directly from the catapult, is how they work. And so they're a government organisation, one of the series of catapults in the UK that tries to work between a number of different organisations and sectors. So very much linking academia with SMEs, investors, local authorities, large corporations. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to coordinate things between a number of major organisations and sectors to try to energise this market. And the difference is that the catapults typically in this country are more about finding opportunities for SMEs. So a lot of them are focused on providing information to help SMEs sell more product. In the case of the Connected Places catapult, because the smart cities market is still growing and still a very nascent market, they've had to get much more involved with the cities themselves and to stir up some of the business. So, what I wanted to do is quickly highlight actually one of their case studies, which is Belfast. So they've worked very closely with Belfast in terms of how do they bring tools and data-based, digital-based tools to Belfast to help them run their businesses better or run their city better. And these are just some examples. And if you like, in terms of, a lot of this is about planning. So a lot of this is about how do they map the city and they plan how to grow businesses and set up housing and various planning features around the city. So this is just one example of some of the things that might be done. And then, in terms of what they're doing is they're very much, looking at artificial intelligence and data, what could be done with data to make things better, concentrating on how do we, as society changes, how do we support those changes, both in terms of aging society, but then also in terms of the climate emergency, issues like that. So one of the big focuses in Oxfordshire is on clean growth. So the whole idea is to how do we help and enable some of those things to happen. And the future of mobility, which is one of the major focuses on for the county council transport team and the innovation team within the county council. So a lot of very similar issues happening in Belfast or being addressed in Belfast in the same way as they're being addressed in Oxford as well, Oxford and Oxfordshire. Where Smart Oxford is very much shorthand for Oxfordshire, because we're really talking about the Oxford city region. You can't just take the city out of its geographic context. It has to be thought of in this wider area, because we're very much a commuter city as well. So an awful lot of people are commuting into the city, and it's a larger area than just the city itself. So, in terms of the city itself, we're a small city with a big impact. So 160,000 people, a full range of every issue that a large city has. Everything from severe deprivation, pollution, traffic. Everybody who knows Oxford knows the traffic problems, flooding issues, as we know as well. One of the really critical things of Oxford is that this city is the second worst in inequality in the whole of the UK. The third worst city in inequality is London, which is not surprising. We're talking about the disparity between rich and poor and deprived and otherwise. And Oxford is the second worst. London is the third worst. Such a large city, you're not surprised. And the worst city in in the UK is Cambridge, in terms of inequality. Now, and I'm not trying to say that we're better than Cambridge in this respect, but well, I can do. But the worst thing about that is that Oxford and Cambridge are the two worst cities in terms of inequality of any of the cities in the UK. Now, I'm quite disgusted by that. I think that's not acceptable. And anything that I can do, and I'll talk more about this later, anything I can do or technology can be, is there any way in which technology can be used to help address these issues? We have some of the worst, most deprived communities in the whole of the UK in Oxford. We have some of the lowest educational attainment in Oxford, in some parts of Oxford, right next door to the other extremes. So the positive side, the positive side is where innovative ideas, active citizens, stakeholders. So there's a really positive vibe about the place and what's possible, and there is more of an integrated. Sometimes it's a struggle to find how integrated it is because there are all these organisations that seem to be working in different directions, but it is an integrated ecosystem where you've got public sector organisations working very closely with a number of other bodies around the city and the county. And this is, if you like, some of the partners that I work with. So whilst, as I said, I don't have a team and I don't have a budget, I do have an interesting collection of partners that I need to work with and try to persuade to do the right thing. So obviously the City Council and the County Council, the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership, the Lucy Group, EDF Energy is involved fairly strongly with us as well as SSE Networks, so Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, because they're the main distribution network operator. There's obviously Harwell, Low Carbon Oxford, the Oxford Strategic Partnership, Nominet, and Oxford Brooks. And Oxford University. So working very closely with all of those organisations and trying to stir them up into doing some of the right things. I also have to say that any funding that I do have is very fixed in terms of coming from an ERDF, so it's a European Regional Development funded project, Innovation Support for Business. Sorry about all these acronyms. So it's Innovation Support for Business and European Regional Development funded. So this is the only funding that I do get is to run a series of workshops and ultimately to refurbish a co-working space for startups focused on smart city solutions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is very much a program that's run by the LEP, by the Local Enterprise Partnership, and tries to works with about 6 other partners across the county to try to drive things forward. One of the things that I do is I'm running a workshop series, which, as I say here, the objective is to try to build a cohort of smart city solution startups. So startups that are focused on creating smart city solutions. The primary mission is to get them to deliver things to benefit us locally in Oxford, and if I can help them then build their businesses to export across to other regions and other smart cities, that's really how I see my role. So it's very much a workshop series designed to take SMEs and startups through the learning process, learning what a target audience is, identifying and engaging with supportive organisations. So obviously, how do you work with both universities? How do you work with research organisations, the catapults, other organisations within Oxfordshire, which we have a wealth of, obviously, and then try to introduce them to funding sources and financing organisations as well. So I'm in the process of that. I've delivered 6 of the 10 workshops on that, and I'm going to be, the next 4 will be over the March, April, May, June, so March to June, and very much focused on engaging with the local communities and bottom up trying to help them, enable them to build some of the solutions that they need to make their lives better. What I did when I took on the role, as I say, 18 months ago, I didn't have any direct, measurable goals. So what I took as my personal goal was to deliver the Oxford 2050 vision. So you may or may not have heard of this. This is around about 2 years ago. People know Bob Price, who used to be the leader of the City Council. This was kind of his legacy document. He got a number of stakeholders from across Oxford to build a vision of what they wanted Oxford to be in the future. So set it out to 2050, this is the vision of what Oxford should be. And it covers 5 different areas. And so what I thought I'd do to start with when I took on the role was, okay, these are the 5 different sectors: employment and learning, people, communities, built and natural environment, transport and connectivity, and culture and leisure. What has actually been done against each of those 5? And is there a way in which technology can help in any way? And it may be really simple. It could be a smartphone apps. I'm not going overboard in terms of what technology could be used, but it could be something fairly simple. And so what I then did is looked at what had been done and what had not been done. So basic gap analysis. So employment and learning, not done really at all. People and communities, some work done. And there's an initiative called Healthy New Towns that's focused on Barton Park, Bicester, a number of different areas. And that's all about integrating social and healthcare. So some work has been done on the people and communities side. Built and natural environment, again, some work in there by Oxfordshire County Council and Oxford City Council. And the bit that's been most done is the transport and connectivity piece. A lot of that's been done. It's been a major focus of the iHub innovation team in the County Council. So they've done a lot of work, a lot of pilot projects working with Oxbotica and companies like that in terms of autonomous vehicles, etc. So a lot of work has been done in this space, mainly because the innovation team kind of came out of the transport team within the County Council. I'm saying that right, aren't I, DD? Very good. And culture and leisure really is not done. So there's an awful lot of stuff that's not been done. The things that have been done, built and natural environment, it's kind of being done by the county innovation team, the sustainability team, Oxfordshire Green Tech. There's a number of different organisations involved in doing things, and a lot of focus on this. I'm not going to go through some of these. Again, sorry about all the acronyms. But there's been a lot of work done in terms of energy. There's obviously a big focus on the climate emergency and how are we addressing that. And one of the things that's been highlighted very recently is the zero emission zone, which I'm sure many people have opinions about. But the whole idea is that, so a number of things have been done, both on the energy side and in terms of the natural environment. There is a pollution sensor network, there's a flood warning system. So under every one of the bridges, there's a sensor that sees what the level of water is below the bridge. And if it gets above a certain height, then a warning is sounded, and that usually then they'll come and close close Botley Road under the railway bridge. So there are things like that happen because there are warning systems that make that happen. So quite a bit of stuff has been done in there. The transport and connectivity, again, a major focus, as I said, a major focus for the County Council, the innovation team. So as I said, connected autonomous vehicles, and that's one of the major spin-out areas of Oxford University with Oxfordshire. Integrated mobility apps, electric vehicles, a very big focus on EV, electric vehicles at the moment. And some of you will have seen in the news today, in the local news today, the announcement by Arrival, which is a Bicester and Banbury-based company. They're making electric trucks and electric... So they're focused very much on how do you move goods around zero carbon. Data-driven, and then a lot of stuff on how do you help people move more effectively around the city and wider than that. So we're very keen on making sure that any of these apps that are out there in terms of helping people move integrate not just buses and trains and cars, but also integrate with cycling and walking and trying to do things in a more efficient way. So what I then took is, because I did that gap analysis, or saw what had been done and what had not been done, really I would categorise as the well-being elements. So the key pieces that still need to be properly worked on within Oxford, and maybe technology doesn't help necessarily, but there are ways in which technology could be used, and this is kind of back out to you if you've got any suggestions or any ideas in which we might engage with communities and help on the education and employability initiatives. I've been working very closely with Activate Learning and, missing the G there, Abingdon and Whitney colleges, etc. How do you engage with some of those educational establishments to help them educate the people better? Working with the Healthy New Towns initiatives on health and social care integration, home monitoring systems, and trying to reduce this deprivation and inequality issue. And I know that the County Council is starting to move much more, the innovation team of the County Council is also moving much more into the social and healthcare sector as well. Trying to see, again, in which ways we can help use technology to address this. The other piece is culture and leisure. Using technology, using smartphone apps for retail tourist info. So another of the issues, having lived in Oxford now for 37 years, obviously you see what's happening in terms of the retail situation, the retail experience that we have in the city centre, and how can we make that better? How can we use smartphone apps for footfall tracking? How do we help inform the retail organisations about who's moving where and what possible offers they can make, and how do you make it more effective? How do you get the covered market to be that much more exciting? Energise it somehow. And AR, VR. So this is augmented reality and virtual reality experiences, cultural link-ups, etc. One of the things I've been working on quite closely, my old college is Christchurch, and obviously you've got a possibility there of using virtual reality or augmented reality to do all sorts of really interesting stories around, right from the early days in Alice in Wonderland or Harry Potter or Dark Materials, all of those things that are happening locally from the literary side, but then also our historical situation as well, and all the stories that could be told And there could be some really we're doing a lot of development in the town hall at the moment, opening up a new museum in there, and I'm hoping to get some virtual reality experiences in there, because a lot of it's about how do you bring visitors in and engage them and tell the stories that we have here in Oxford, which are phenomenal, both from the literary side but also from the historical side. And technology can be used in wonderful ways to make that happen. All of these things are great, and they're kind of great wishful things to happen. But there are some fundamental technical infrastructure pieces that we need to find ways of deploying within Oxford and Oxfordshire as a whole. So I've classed them as two key areas: ubiquitous device connectivity network. So that's really just saying that what we need in Oxford is some sort of a connectivity network that enables us to connect all sorts of different devices. And obviously you've got things like traffic lighting, control systems, transport, mobility stuff, air pollution, flooding sensors, etc. And there's a lot of different technologies that are deployed in pockets here and there, but there's no overall consistency across different methods. Obviously you've got LoRaWAN, you've got white space technology, you've got a whole range of different technologies that are used. Ultimately, perhaps we get to 5G, but usually the comment back on that one is it'd be great if we had 4G, even 3G connectivity. I live in Summertown, and I can't get a decent mobile phone signal in my house on the Woodstock Road. It's incredible how far behind we are on that. But the whole idea is ultimately the objective is to try to get to leading edge connectivity networks. The other, probably more challenging piece is open data. And I put it specifically as open access to data because there's an awful lot of data available out there, but it's all in siloed databases, either within the local authorities or externally within the universities, within different private sector organisations. And if we found a way of making that open and accessible, and certainly I know that obviously we have some significant people from the Open Data Institute in Oxford, it'd be good to get them involved in how do we make this data more open and how do we encourage people to start to move that. And what I'm saying here is if we can fix these, and we have started in pockets. This isn't completely. It's not as if we've not established any of this. It's a very slow and incremental steps that we're starting to make some of these things happen. Once you've got that, then you can, to some extent, go out to the community and say, you know what your problems are. You know what you want to, or you would like to do to fix things, and it's kind of bottom-up community engagement, and especially from the deprivation issues and the low education attainment issues, it's going out to some of those communities, and I see that as one of the major parts of my role, going out and engaging with them and providing them the if you like, the fundamental tools, but saying, go invent the stuff yourselves and we'll support you and integrate it into the whole. So that's really what I see as one of my key areas. Bottom-up community engagement is one of the pieces. So, changing tack slightly. One of the areas, and if you like, this is again looking forward to the future. A lot of this presentation is about the future. the LIS is Local Industrial Strategy. Sorry again for the acronym. As part of the Local Industrial Strategy, so Oxfordshire was asked by central government, because we are one of the few regions in the country that produces a net gross value added to the exchequer, which is all very positive in many respects. We have therefore, Oxford and the LEP, Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, has, together with a number of partners, built the Local Industrial Strategy proposal back to central government. And one of the key pieces of that is a proposal to host living labs in Oxfordshire. Living labs on clean growth, health and well-being, and data and mobility. So the whole idea is that we are saying to the world, to organisations, to companies, to public sector organisations, come and work with us in these three sectors, try things, test things, use Oxfordshire as a living lab to try things out and pilot new solutions. And I'm working very closely with organisations like Bobox, which is Mobility Oxfordshire, which is driving a lot of the EV, some of the connected autonomous vehicle stuff, to define how we deliver that central observatory. How do we build an organisation that provides the governance and connectivity for companies? So if companies come to us and say, yes, we'd love to work with you on data and mobility, well, where's the support organisation? What's the structure? How do we engage? Who do we engage with? That's the piece that I see Smart Oxford moving into that space. And we're calling it Living Oxford because that is the space that we want to have properly resourced and funded to use as the central point of contact for any organisations wanting to work with us on that. So there are a number of living lab potentials. There's the Harwell campus for the energy tech cluster. There's the Osney Mead Innovation Quarter. So there's an awful lot of stuff happening in Osney Mead that's university driven because it's a university-owned space. And how can we work with the university to make the Innovation Quarter as effective and as relevant as possible? Data and mobility, there's the Botley Road corridor, there's the new Oxpens development, there's a lot of work happening in Culloma around about, a lot of it again with connected autonomous vehicles. How do you test out things in Culloma? The CAV projects, health and well-being, the Healthy New Towns, adult social care innovation pilots, all of these things. So there's an awful lot of stuff that's happening today without any proper coordination across all the different elements. And that's where we see Living Oxford, which in my mind is where Smart Oxford will move. That's not my last slide, is it? Okay. No. So the whole idea of Living Oxford is a community innovating for a better future. So it's about using, and if anybody's seen the Smart Oxford vision and statements, these are very much cut and paste from that. So it's about how do we have a region that has all of these issues, the environmental, transportation, social housing, etc. issues, and how do we build that resilient and safer environment? How do we work together? And this is where I see Smart Oxford moving into this Living Oxford space, properly resourced, properly funded as part of the local industrial strategy. So this is something I'm working very closely on now. And I don't know what I've done to break this, but never mind. So what is Living Oxford? so this is very much heads up as to where we're looking at, how we're thinking about moving this forward. It's a central hub for all Living Lab projects within Oxfordshire. So it's to facilitate that connectivity between organisations and act as that networking piece. Be a single point of contact, provide the framework, provide performance monitoring. So again, this is where we need to start to build that open database in terms of if we engage with any organisations, we do that on the basis that they provide data that's open and usable by multiple organisations. So there's going to be some pushback from some organisations who want to use their data for their own benefits, their own purposes. But one of the key criteria that we'll be using is that if you sign up, if you want to work with us, then it has to be in terms of you having data that's open and accessible, like multiple organisations. Core functions, identification, facilitation, promotion, engaging people, communities. And a lot of this also is about how do you engage with the communities? How do you have proper feedback loops using, engaging with the community? So if you have a living lab in a particular location on a particular subject, the most important thing is that you get real feedback from the people who are involved, who are actually affected by that particular project and that particular pilot. You have to be very careful about how you manage that, because the usual thing is the loudest, most vocal people end up dominating things. You have to be very careful about demographically managing that feedback. And some of the issues, I don't know if anybody in here was involved in the Citizens' Assembly for the climate action stuff. Oxford City Council ran an exercise recently called the Citizens' Assembly, stumbling over the words, and that was very much specifically to look at what actions could be taken by the local Oxford population in terms of addressing some of the climate issues that we have, and whether it's relevant to make things happen here in Oxfordshire, or whether you have to do it on a global basis. But that was very carefully managed in terms of, we used Ipsos Mori to help us choose the people and make sure that they were demographically consistent with the population of Oxford. And those are the sorts of things that I see getting involved in. So very much a matter of Living Oxford being key components of the local industrial strategy and the community engagement piece for how do you make these things happen, how you properly measure what the impact of these things are. So Smart Oxford priorities, repeating what I said before, get the technology deployed, ubiquitous device connectivity, open access to data, deliver and support the local industrial strategy living labs, underpinned by all of the... We have phenomenal assets within Oxford and Oxfordshire, just in terms of the capabilities of the people, the technology and innovation capabilities that we have here. And we shouldn't be, we're not necessarily backward in telling people about them, because we seem to achieve all the #1 listings worldwide. But it's a matter about how do you use that effectively. Help commercialise the technology for smart cities, so that's very much what I'm doing in terms of running the workshop series and setting up the co-working space, which hopefully will be in the town hall, because it has to be, the rules are that I have to have an Oxford City Council owned building and put that co-working space in there. It'll be very central, it'll be low cost co-working, desk-based stuff. Deliver the 2050 vision and support the Oxfordshire 2030 zero carbon objective. So a lot of what we're focused on and a number of projects. There's the LEO project, Local Energy Oxfordshire, which is very much focused on how do you drive to zero carbon by 2030. So that is very much an Oxfordshire-based objective. With people like Barbara Hammond being one of the key movers in that. Barbara Hammond, Low Carbon Oxford, and Malcolm McCulloch, people like that involved in the whole process of how do we make that happen. And this is still not working. So the final slide is just a picture of all of the things, all of the areas that we're trying to drive. I mean, there's even a picture of the arrival, V2Go, so vehicle to grid, vehicle, energy vehicle, electric vehicle. The Pick Me Up service, which is one of the few top-down initiatives that have been really effective in terms of moving people around. Living Oxford, a community innovation for a better future. So that's the objective for the future, and I'm looking to see Smart Oxford transition into Living Oxford probably by the end of this year, as we start to establish that as a real vehicle and a properly funded vehicle as part of the local industrial strategy. And I think that is it. Yes. So, questions? Go for it.
There's one word you haven't mentioned, and that's government. Aren't they a smart driver for you?
So there's two pieces to that. I work for, as I say, I work for both the City Council and the County Council, so I work as a local government employee. And the local industrial strategy is the proposal by Oxfordshire to central government. And the theory is that central government will one day, when they get their act together, provide significant funding to enable Oxfordshire to implement the local industrial strategy. So, but I'm also very keen to make Living Oxford, Smart Oxford and Living Oxford, to be an independent organisation, so independent of public sector bodies, and to be able to be active in a more flexible way, if you like, and not constrained by some of the constraints that are needed within the public sector. So I don't know if that answers your question, but...
So there's no guidelines which government is saying to cities or county councils, you should be thinking about this.
There's no, and the smart city movement as a whole, and I've been working with smart over the last 18 months or so, working with other smart cities across the UK and wider. And whilst there's a general positive, central government support for smart city initiatives, there's no guiding organisation within it. One of the things I do find is that there is a group, I'm part of a group of smart cities that are similar characteristics and sizes, because if we compare notes and we share ideas and experiences, it's better with similar sized cities than trying to do it with mega cities. There's no point in trying to copy a Chinese city or an Indian city that's doing everything from scratch for millions of people. So there's quite a good group of us involving Exeter, Cambridge, York, Bristol. Bristol's a bit bigger than the rest of us, but probably the leading smart city in the UK. So we're trying to do things between us and connect that way. While there is some central government stuff, obviously, and I'd like to see that we get some funding from them finally for the Living Oxford process. But yeah, the more that we can do it independently, and it enables you to do things much more flexibly. Okay, sorry to sit with that.
How do you try to ensure that the technology initiatives you support actually have real utility, and don't just produce a sort of novel technology distraction, but this is a purpose.
Yes, and I think and that's a very key point. I think that when we're looking at, okay, from the Smart Oxford perspective, there's not that level of control necessarily. What we're trying to do, especially with the Living Oxford initiative, is to very much look at how do we provide the feedback loops, the data to support whether we're actually doing something that's measurably beneficial to the citizens. Because one of the things I've found is looking at smart cities around the world, there's kind of generation one smart cities that have kind of done a bit of tech here and there. They might have done some LED lighting or done some pollution. So they call themselves smart because they've deployed a bit of tech somewhere. But nowadays what's happening is kind of generation two smart cities are those that say we only consider ourselves smart if we're delivering measurable benefits to the citizens. And okay, there are lots of the ways in which you can do that. So even the transport and connectivity stuff that we've done in Oxford could be measured to provide, in terms of providing a benefit to people. But you've got to look at holistically. You've got to look across the whole of the people's experiences. And you're right. Put in the measurement systems. Put in the data collection to see whether these things are actually doing something positive. But a good point. So, did you have a question?
Did you sort of partly answered it, but just thinking about all the smart cities around the world that you sort of mentioned, is there any things that you've seen in any of those that have been the most kind of exciting and deploying it?
No, I think that, and certainly I think we're breaking new ground by trying to think about the well-being aspects. There's been quite a lot of work within a number of the US cities in terms of trying to address the communities and the well-being elements, so trying to measure that piece. But it's still very early days in terms of smart city initiatives. There's an awful lot of smart city stuff happening in China and India, but what they tend to do is they'll do it from a greenfield site. So they'll start from scratch and build a city for 10 million people with all of the technology deployed, or just deploy it and make things happen. And sometimes that can be pretty unnerving about how they do that, because it's just government structured stuff that's rolled out, not necessarily along to everybody's benefit. And that's my own personal opinions are coming in there as well. Sorry, yeah.
So there are still some workshops being funded by the European Regional Fund, I understand.
Yes.
And so is there the idea to replace the funding once we leave the EU? Or, I mean, I'm just asking about the funds coming from the EU in connection to Brexit.
Well, this funding, this ERDF funding that I'm using, I used the logo up there, is specifically for a series of workshops and to deliver some benefits. It's a project that finishes at the end of this year. So it's
not like the fundamental part of the...
No, absolutely not. Even I would certainly like it to continue, but no, unfortunately that has some limited... Sorry, somewhere over here.
So I'm still thinking about this funding, because you earlier said about, you mentioned something like seeking funding other than central government.
Yeah.
And whether you want central government to do that or not, I rather think central government's job is to basically just stick to things like defence and justice and law and order.
Yeah.
But we're hearing about Jeff was asking about dependence on the European Union funding. But do we get funding from businesses or anything like that? We're developing, trying to get business to meet or communicate with other stakeholders in this.
Yes. So very much, if you're looking ahead to Living Oxford, How do we fund it? Okay, it'd be nice to have a big grant from the central government to go make something happen, but the reality is that the way to make things happen is to engage with local businesses and local communities and find funding that way. And so there will be definitely a subscription-based or membership-based organisation of funding to make that happen. And at the end of the day, it's not huge amounts of funding that are required, because it's more about how do you fund a facilitation or group of people. So it's maybe half a dozen. Yeah, exactly. And people who are then able to make those connections than that facilitation. So it's more about facilitation than actually funding major projects. Okay, we need to engage with the finance community to get them involved in funding major projects that have benefits to companies and organisations and communities. But it's that way that we're thinking of things. Sorry, yeah.
You were talking about smarter Oxfordshire, but I noticed nothing about Vale of the White Horse, South Oxford District Council, any of the older towns in the south which actually feed large numbers of people to Oxford. So are they not involved? Do they not want to be involved, or you just haven't got to that stage?
They're involved from the Oxfordshire. As I say, I'm both a county council employee and a city council employee. So working, so through obviously talk to each of the different district councils. So work with all of them individually as well. I'm part of the Digital Infrastructure Strategy Board that's looking at the strategy for digital infrastructure across the whole of the county, and that engages with each of the district councils as well as with Oxford City Council. But fundamentally, so I'm looking at it both as an Oxford-focused thing and a county-focused thing, as opposed to individual. There are smart initiatives happening in Abingdon, Whitney, Henley, all of those different places, but those are more low level in terms of how do they use technology. Even connectivity, like the Zoom is currently wiring up Henley for gigabit fibre within Henley as part of an initiative that's happening. But that's a private sector initiated project.
No, I'm just thinking that you need, if you're going to make Oxfordshire smart, you really need those projects need to come together, some central link.
And
there at the moment.
And that is driven by so one area of that is the digital infrastructure strategy, which is being driven by the county council, but then is being signed up to and engaging each of the different districts as well. So we have a monthly meeting of each of the district council representatives together with the county council to look at the digital infrastructure for the county as a whole. So that's how it's happening and how it's working. And certainly, you're absolutely right. From the Living Oxford perspective, if we're taking living lab initiatives and pilots out around Oxfordshire, we will need to engage with each of the districts specifically. I mean, it'll be essential to make that happen, even if it's just the planning organisations within each of the districts. Sorry, yeah.
Just on a similar subject to that, what's your success in terms of trying to make sure that basic infrastructure and connectivity are in place? Because you mentioned about your mobile phone signal, and I guess in rural areas as well, that the broadband speeds are not very good. So a lot of this is going to fail if the weakest link is a sort of black hole in mobile coverage or slow broadband. So have you got any guarantees from infrastructure providers that they'll enable these things to happen?
Yes. So actually, there's better deployment of gigabit connectivity outside Oxford City and around the rural parts of Oxfordshire than there is in the city. Just happens. So some of you may know the company GigaClear, run by Matthew Hare. Well, he's set up originally by Matthew Hare. That had a very interesting approach to each of the parish councils, especially around the rural parts of Oxfordshire, and have deployed some phenomenal broadband speeds in a lot of the villages and a lot of the communities, rural communities. And in Oxford, the challenge we have in Oxford itself is that Virgin Media have a cable network which is almost covers the whole of the city. That whilst it can provide 250, 300 megabit connections, it can't go to the gigabit connection speed that we need for 5G services, etc. So we're trying to work out, this is where I'm working very closely with the Better Broadband for Oxfordshire scheme, which is run out of and that's run by Craig Bauer, who is absolutely driving this whole digital infrastructure strategy across the county. How do we make enable connectivity to happen? Because you have to work with private sector, telecoms operators to make it happen. How do we enable that to happen within both the city and across the county? For benefits like the connected autonomous vehicle stuff that the county council is doing, how do you enable that, and the connected piece being the connectivity, and how do you make sure we have gigabit fibre connections throughout the county, not just the city? So a lot of that's happening, but it's a balance between private sector telecoms operators and the public sector authorising bodies, and working with planning organisations, etc. as well. Yeah.
You made an interesting point, Bill. Smarter Cities 1 is more about trucking technology out into cities, and Smarter Cities 2 is more about trying to measure the impact on the community or measure the benefits.
Yeah.
Have you seen good examples of how people are measuring the benefits?
They're starting to come through. In terms of, as I say, so some of the activities by, and I forget, it's the Smart Cities Council, which is one of the US-based organisations that's working with a lot of cities across the US, is starting to track data and track responses and surveys from the people, and trying to work out how to measure that. So that's an ongoing thing I'm trying to keep on top of. If you know of any specific, anybody knows of any specific measurement criteria that organisations are using to track that well-being and that community engagement piece, I'd be very keen to get to know it.
I've not seen any, but it's been an interesting thing to...
There are, every so often there are new things that pop up which are quite interesting, and how they measure things and how they work out what the benefits are. Sorry.
You have an organisation called 4 Global.
4 Global.
And they're sucking in information about
participation
in sports and organisations, and provide all sorts of data.
And that's 4 Global is number 4 Global, or? Okay. No, interesting, thank you. Yeah, there's a number of organisations like that. Sorry, question.
I'm interested in the extent to which you see your role addressing what I would call the deficiencies of central government in terms of innovation.
Wow.
I mean, the Oxford MK Cambridge Arc seems to consist of roads that we don't need and railway lines from the past century being reopened.
Yeah.
And no attempt to think about what really needs to move between Oxford and Cambridge, which is intellectual property.
Okay. It's whether I can affect any of that, I don't know. Well, I will push back on that to some extent, in that Oxfordshire is certainly taking a lead in terms of the digital infrastructure strategy and what we're doing about connectivity to digital connectivity, and because I hate being in discussions about, oh, we need a wider A34 and we need to move. No, we need better broadband speed so that people don't have to move, etc. So there's all those. So we are, and as part of the ARC organisation, the Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge ARC, there is a lot of focus now on how do we enable the technologies to be used across that. So I am not interested in the roads, the housing, the railway lines essentially. I'm interested more about how we work together in a digital connectivity way across that. And that is starting to come together. And obviously, as I say, from the smart city perspective, work very closely with Smart Cambridgeshire, I think. And also Milton Keynes. So there's a lot of stuff that's being shared between those three areas, and to try to make that digital connectivity, technology piece work better. Yes, so there is a very, in terms of the ARC organisation, there is obviously those people, the pure planning people that are thinking about housing and roads and those sort of elements. There's also a group of people that are starting to think about how to make it work from a connectivity, from a technology perspective. Yeah.
What's your view on 5G, given that there is a lot of scientific evidence coming out now that if it is rolled out across everywhere, it's going to be extremely detrimental to everybody's health. It's going to promote cancer and other reactions in the human person that is going to be really bad for our health.
Well, in the same way as mobile phones are detrimental.
Yeah, that's the beginning of it. This is more serious. But 5G, I've got some information came from a group who've been studying it that I could let you have, and they are seriously concerned at the effect of cancer in the human population if it's rolled out everywhere.
So yes, that does come up. There is a lot of work being done in the other aspect of looking at, from Public Health England has been doing a lot of studies to see if there is any health detriments in the usage of 5G, and they haven't come with anything yet. So they've been very positive about the rollout of new technology. So, as I say, it's like deploying more mobile phones. There isn't, anyway, there's all sorts of, there is a continual usage, publication, or a number of different bodies that are continuing to look at it. And if it turns out to be completely detrimental to health, then absolutely.
Could be too late. Could be too late by then if you rolled it out and everybody's going down pockets of cancer around the places where the 5G aerials are, etc. It's too late. Our technology is relying on it for something that is in fact killing us all off.
So, and these are killing us, so
these are scrambling people's brains, they've proven it.
Yes. So we need to ban mobile phones. But it's really difficult to ban technology.
So we push technology
I understand.
against human health,
I
human
completely
well-being.
understand.
It's rather one against the other. It's not promoting well-being. It isn't.
No, I do understand, and certainly the planning organisations within each of the different public sector bodies are taking continual notice of any of that data that comes through. So yes, absolutely, I completely understand, and it's an argument that's put forward a lot. Sorry,
Yeah, going back to something you said much earlier about inequality and cities, with Cambridge, you're working quite a lot with Cambridge and Oxford together, which are cities with very high levels of inequality.
Yeah.
Is there any other smart cities where they've done work with technology to inform or even change that, or is there any best practice, any places with lower inequality that you could be working with to see whether there's anything coming out of that area? There seems to be something that was lost in the noise a bit, is that your well-being focus is the right focus, but part of that is addressing these, how unequal is it, why is it, what's going on.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what I'm trying to do at the moment. So I work very closely with Bristol, for instance, which is the leading smart city in the UK at the moment, and they have an inequality issue within Bristol. They have some very deprived areas, not as extreme as we have within Oxford and Cambridge, but looking at seeing how those things can be addressed as well. And a lot of it comes down to connectivity in some of the areas. So you're looking at the ubiquity of your personal devices, computing devices, and enabling broadband speeds in certain areas. A lot of it's down to just purely that network capability. But yes, I'm always really interested to understand if there are any technology ways in which we can address some of the deprivation issues directly. Yeah, I'm open to it and looking for them. Yeah.
Sure, the deprivation in Oxford, Cambridge and London is not because of large numbers of extremely poor people, it's because of a few very rich people.
No, it is actually. We have some of the most deprived communities in the whole of the country.
More so
in
than
Oxford.
like Windows or Bunker.
Yes, we do. We have some of the areas of Blackbird, Leeds, Bath and Rose Hill. Some of those... sorry?
And more than Bradford.
Yes. We have some of the worst deprivation in the whole of the UK. In Oxford. And the fact...
And biggest stretch, sorry, Tony, inequality and life expectancy in Summertown, where Tony lives, and Blackbird Leeds. So Tony can expect to live 9 years longer than an adult male in Blackbird Leeds. And I think the stretch is 7 years, correct me if I'm wrong, for women. So very short distance.
It is incredible.
It seems to be sort of linked to the relative cost of living in these places, because London is the highest cost, followed by Oxford, followed by Cambridge. And Coventry is somewhere along, and then Bristol.
No, absolutely. And the other interesting result of the fact that Oxford is the least affordable city to live in the UK is any organisations offering jobs to people to encourage people to move to Oxford often get rejected because they can't afford to move to Oxford. So there's a big move towards inclusive employment now as well, and a much more of an engagement with how do you employ people from a wider spectrum, who, if they're already living here, then how can we employ them?
Yeah, and that's just commutability. So there are things like express buses or express train.
Yeah, there's all sorts of absolutely. There's lots of different ideas at the moment. I mean, so for instance, all of the new the Westgate Centre, there's a lot of new employment, but companies like John Lewis are having to bus people in from 20, 30, 40 miles away to work at Westgate because they can't afford to live anywhere near.
Well, I bet this division of the Thames Valley Police do likewise too.
Yeah. No, exactly. So those things are happening.
Is it significant that Cambridge and Oxford are both top academic cities?
I don't knock the fact that Oxford and Cambridge create a phenomenal number of really leading-edge technology innovation companies. So we're great at creating new technology companies and innovative companies within Oxford and Cambridge. The issue that I have is that the wealth is created in this very small strata of knowledge workers, and we're not finding a way of engaging with a wider population, the service organisations that could support that, and finding a way of moving the commercial success, engaging with everyone.
Down the ladder.
Yeah, and that's essential that we have the right business models in place to make that happen. Yeah.
So you're obviously concerned about the less well-off in the area. What are you doing to ensure that your initiatives don't just make a nicer city a better city for the well-off?
Well, exactly.
I think what specific things are you doing to ensure that doesn't happen, since it may well be the default if you don't make a point of it.
And I think that's where it's a matter of trying to make sure that that we address it's by focusing on the well-being elements. It's by focusing on those elements more than anything else to try to make sure that it's not just the wealthy areas that benefit. So what can we do?
To ensure that it's the well-being of all the different groups, as opposed to the ones that typically get involved in these kinds of initiatives or get engaged. So people being left out of all sorts of things is the norm.
Yeah.
What are you doing to prevent that, to ensure that everyone's lifted up together?
And to some extent, that's about So when I talked about the loud, making sure that the loudest people aren't necessarily the ones that dominate, and the issue that we have within Oxford, we have the highest density of community action groups anywhere in the country, but those community action groups are then within certain pockets of the city, and there are almost no community action groups in some of the more deprived areas of the city. It's going out there and engaging and working with those communities and deliberately trying to get them involved in helping to create things better for themselves. So yes, it's a matter of focus as opposed to just allow. You can put out a request to the population, and you can get inundated with people wanting to do things, but you have to sift that through and get through to the people you actually want to work with. So it's a more deliberate process of engagement, community engagement. Sorry.
How exactly are you working with startups? If someone comes with a great idea that sort of solves one of these issues, are you helping them find investment? Or?
Yes, what I'm trying to do is, there's a number of organisations that, so as I say, have been running these workshops to try to build that cohort of companies. I mean, a number of people in this room may know of the company Sociability. Sociability was set up by a student in Oxford called Matt Pieri, who happens to be wheelchair bound, and his app is all about mapping out within Oxford what buildings and what locations are accessible for wheelchairs, and not just in a basic, is there a step into the location or not, because when he's with friends, one step doesn't matter. He can always get somebody to help him. But if there's a whole staircase that he's got to go through, so it's mapping out, that just happens to be one example of what I'm trying to do, is to help connect those types of startups to people that could help, complete his solution. Ultimately, I haven't managed to establish it yet, a co-working space for people to work in, low-cost co-working space for startups to be, to act as a central point. So it's starting to, and a lot of it's about facilitation and connection, helping them to understand what their processes need to be to grow that startup business through the development process and maturity.
And in terms of the leisure sector, have you been working with Open Active, part of ODI?
Open access.
Active.
Sorry?
Open Active.
Open Active, no, I don't know that.
So again, I think they're sponsored by Sport England.
Oh, okay.
And they're trying to open up leisure data about badminton courts that might be available, or yoga classes that might be available in the future, and they're trying to encourage startups to come together and sort of pull that open data into apps to find sports.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So it's a question here.
You talked earlier about wanting to operate without the sort of constraints that public sector organisations work to. And it seems to me that to do a lot of these things, to roll out some of these things, you're actually going to have to work with public sector organisations who are constrained.
Yeah.
Whether it's the colleges or social and health care, or the universities or the city council, county council, district council. These are all bodies which are constrained by public sector rules. So how are you going to do that?
So I'm not saying that as Living Oxford and Smart Oxford won't work with those organisations. Absolutely, you have to. It's more about, should Smart Oxford or Living Oxford be part of the City Council or a local authority? Can it be a separate organisation like Mobility Oxford, Mobox? Mobox is an independent organisation that's helping to manage and coordinate the mobility projects across the county. That it's more about how do you set the organisation itself up being part of the public sector organisations or within them. And it's not that you don't have to work with, absolutely. Bristol, each of the different smart cities, Bristol is Open, which is one of the lead, as I said, the leading smart city organisation in the country, is absolutely working with all of the city authorities and the universities in Bristol. It has to work very, very closely with them. It's not about not working with them, it's being where that organisation is sited.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was, sooner or later, you're going to want to roll out. You get a brilliant idea to do with, I don't know, something to do with bus transport.
Yeah.
And you do a living lab in a very small area, and it's all wonderful, and then you want to roll it out. So you go to the county council, and then, of course, they're constrained by all sorts of government rules about what they can and can't do.
But the Living Oxford, the Smart Oxford organisation is about facilitation. So if somebody's coming in to do a living lab initiative on bus transport or something, yes, we will help them connect them to the right organisations like Oxford Bus Company, etc., and connect them with the local authorities as well. So it's not, I'm not devolving responsibility, but I'm basically saying it's a facilitation role. And it's trying to put these organisations together. And yes, you're right. For the ultimate rollout of something that's been piloted, you need to have those organisations and make sure they understand how they need to work with each other. So it's more about a facilitation role than anything else. Okay. Yes.
It's just an idea, really. I noticed you work with education, and a couple of people have come up with ideas, and I was just visualising what you might want to do if you can. So if you had an app called Smart City, you could go there as a tourist, and you could go, say, to Oxford Castle, you could use a VR to mop that tour, find out more about the history of Bristol, actually be there, and you could find out how many minutes it is to the next event in Oxford. If you're a community member, you could actually go to Smart City app again, find out about mobility, find out about the next bus coming up on my street, and also find out about which restaurants are available for cheap foods, not just expensive food. Things, if you can't afford it. Right, but there is an app at the moment, you've probably heard of it, where you can get food late in the evening, where it's cheaper price. So things like that.
So there are a number of, so I don't know if anybody knows the company Bimble. Bimble happens to be based up in Summertown and Palmer House. It's a great app that is all about recommending places within any city for experiences. So it could be for food, drink, any other experiences as well. So it's bringing together, what I'd really love to be able to do is bring together a lot of those different applications into an obvious area, and I'm working very closely with Experience Oxfordshire to try to make that happen in terms of a starting point for that connectivity, absolutely. Because there are an awful lot rather than invent new apps and new ideas, there's an awful lot of stuff out there that we can just bring together and coordinate. absolutely trying to do that. But thank you.
Can I just add a comment to that? One of the issues will be is that that's not necessarily viable for the individual entrepreneur who's backing those apps over a single city. So immediately, if they were going to do anything new, they would have to find 20 cities to adopt it in order to be to have a sort of element of viability. So it's a challenge to get that off the ground, because otherwise a single city service A is harder to market and B is not viable for the company behind it.
No, it's interesting because each of the constituent apps could need to live on, need to exist on their own. So Bimble's a good example. Bimble actually has probably more traction in the US. They're based in Oxford. They probably have more traction in the US today, in various cities across the US, than they have here in Oxford. But if we enable them by bringing them in together with a number of other different apps, then they can start to generate more within the local community. So absolutely. And this is why I'm very focused on a cohort of startups that we use within Oxford for our own purposes, but enable them to sell their wares, their services to other cities, and use us as an example, if you like, of how it can be done. But it's important to have that nationally as well.
Because you could use advertising as a method of raising income for your innovations, for education.
Yeah, that's true.
So there could be an advert for, John Lewis's on your app, and that could fund, say, active learning, some computer science students actually building one of your apps that you're
absolutely. That's good input. Thank you. Any other questions?
We are actually beginning to run out of time as well, because we turn into a pumpkin at 9 o'clock. So.
Okay.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for highlighting many issues that probably a lot of us have never thought about how to get from where we are to where you'd like to be. And I just wish you well in learning all these facts, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.